Hello YouTube, my name is Zach. I promised that I would make this video on this YouTube video that I was having a discussion in down here in the comments. This is indeed me. I'll tell you a little bit about myself and then we'll get straight into the good content. I work for a music studio in Atlanta, Georgia. I teach voice, I teach guitar, I teach drums, and I teach piano. I went to college for voice. I'm classically trained. I went to Augusta State University, studied vocal performance, and I learned about the voice from the perspective of what we call a pedagogical approach. In other words, I learned to sing, and my vocal techniques were developed as a result of learning how to teach and understand the instrument. My understanding of the voice comes from learning how to maintain the voice and sustain it. The voice is the most fragile of all of the instruments in the world, in my opinion, and not because it's the easiest to break. I wouldn't argue that it is. I would argue that it's probably somewhat resilient, but it's the most fragile because if it does break, it's the only one you can get, as opposed to as catastrophic as it might be to, drop a $20,000 Steinway piano off of the top of a building. They can be replaced. You lose your voice, you destroy your voice, it's gone. And James LaBrie, as we have all discussed in this video, is a very good example of that. Now, I don't want to make this video focusing just on James LaBrie. I would rather talk a little bit more about the reasonings behind some of my comments and answer a few questions that people had. I plan to make some sort of video series explaining some of these things more in depth, and the reason is that, in my experience, I've found that there are very few videos on YouTube that I would deem to be reliable and accurate. There have been some that are okay, but I haven't found any videos that teach singing or vocal technique, vocal development in a way that I think is healthy and is backed by good science. I think that a lot of what you see on YouTube in terms of vocal techniques and vocal help are people trying to fit the viewer's voices into a certain style or certain method. And I say that because vocal instruction is highly individualized and catered to the people who are taking the lessons or doing the study. There isn't really a one-size-fit-all approach to learning to sing and working on your voice. So, with that in mind, let's dig right into this a little bit. Look at some of these comments. All right, so muscle tension dysphonia basically is when the vocal folds down here engage. They should be the only things acting in this entire mechanism. So when you have an engagement here, the sound comes from down here up through out the mouth, and that's all there should be. Muscle tension dysphonia is when you have strain, this kind of thing, strain in the neck muscles that don't have to engage to create sound. Basically, when you sing, there should be very, very little tension anywhere in your body. The muscles that engage for you to vocalize or to make sound don't require a lot of muscular support from other parts of your neck. And James, in particular, has always had some major issues with muscle tension dysphonia. Like I said, I don't want to make this whole video about him. We can talk more about him at another time. So let's go through and look at a few of these questions. That's some very good ones. Let's see. Yeah, we'll talk about the vocal rupture story later. I'm not terribly worried about that. In case I do make this a regular thing, I don't want this channel or these ideas to be built completely around talking about James LaBrie singing. I don't doubt any of what you're saying insofar as criticism of James' vocal technique. I'm an aspiring vocalist myself who's painfully aware of my own poor technique, so I know not only what it looks like, but also what it feels like. Okay, this isn't a question. Okay. Sorry if this is a lot of rambling, but I have to make sure that I find the right stuff. This is the story of almost every rock singer alive or dead. They start out young and full of adrenaline, arrogance. No effing voice coach is going to tell me how to sing. Fast forward a few years, they're all terrible singers. Instrumentalists mostly know the importance of good technique, but rock vocalists, for some reason, seem to think they're above the laws of nature. So yes, I'm not going to be quite as aggressive as Probus Excogiatoris. I don't know. I'm not sure what that's supposed to be, but I'm not going to be as aggressive as he is about it. But yes, I do think that there is a substantially lower standard held to singers than to other instrumentalists. For example, if you put, I don't know, the guitarist from Imagine Dragons, 21 Pilots, anybody like that, if you put them in Dream Theater, they wouldn't cut it. You know, because they don't have the technical skill, or at least if they have it, they haven't shown it. So singers, however, get the pass a lot of the time, and the reason I think is that since singing is what people hear first predominantly in most music, if the listener can connect to the voice, I think that's probably, you know, people can say, oh, well, I mean, that performer knows how to connect with people. If they don't have great technique, doesn't matter. The problem that comes in with this is that sustaining poor technique over long periods of time causes your voice to decay and worsen. And when that happens, you lose your voice and you can't sing the way that you did. And I think ultimately it hurts the product in the end, in the long run, because you don't have the level of consistency the other musicians do. It's very common that I hear it all the time. Like, I have voice students that almost resentfully take voice lessons, and I have to spend my first couple of sessions together just convincing them that, hey, I'm not trying to turn you into an opera singer, and cleaning up your vocal technique is not going to make you sound like Pavarotti or anything like that. Like, that's not the goal. So it is important and to use good technique. And it's not just rock vocalists, it's vocalists all over the popular music spectrum. It isn't really until you get into the classical spectrum where you have to have good technique. I can honestly say that I can't think of a single singer that isn't in the classical realm that I would say has really good, healthy, sustainable technique. As I mentioned before, there are some freaks of nature that can just sing all sorts of ways and make it for long periods of time, but that doesn't mean they have good technique, and that doesn't mean that what they do is sustainable. On that note, another point that I want to make is that being a good singer and having good technique are they can be mutually exclusive. There are lots of great singers who have terrible technique. There are lots of singers with great technique that just don't sound that good. There are people with both great technique and a great voice. But I want people to understand that just because I say someone has bad technique doesn't mean I'm saying that they're a bad singer. They have poor singing skill. When I define technique, I think of sustainability. I think if this person sung like this every day for the next 20 years, would they still have a voice or not? Would they be as strong as they are now at that time, or at least, show very few signs of decay? And if I can't justify a yes answer to those questions, and they have bad technique, and there are physical things that you can look at and use to determine if they have good or bad technique as well. So, moving on. It's a good comment. I've always held the opinion that James is... Okay, so we're not talking about James here. What do you think about Devin Townsend? So maybe what I should do is make a series of videos discussing specific singers that are recommended to me. Devin Townsend is one of those freaks that just seems to last. I do think that his shift in his singing recently is suggestive of him being aware that he's running out of steam a little bit, and he's not going to be as aggressive anymore. He won't be able to keep up with what he's doing much longer. Ockerfeldt, doing his growls or his clean singing, I think that they are both unhealthy. Like I said, I can go into specific singers another time. What type of coaching learning would you recommend for young singers? What I think about Daniel Tompkins' technique. Daniel Tompkins, he's a good singer. He has bad technique. There's a lot of reasons. One thing that Daniel Tompkins uses is a lot of what we call the covered sound, or singing off of the voice. And the difference is, when you listen to me speak, you can hear the fullness of my voice. But if I started talking like this and you hear the airiness, the kind of air pushing over the top of the voice, that would be me speaking off of the voice. Singing off of the voice is okay in small amounts. In the long term, it's pretty damaging. So I would say that Daniel Tompkins' technique is going to be limited in the long term by him singing off the voice. And there's a lot of reasons for that. We can go into that another time. But the topic of singing off the voice is a very good one to learn about. As far as what type of coaching or learning you would recommend for young singers, that is dependent upon the person. Generally, breath support is something that you should really focus on. I could probably make a video specifically about breath support and what it is. There are a lot of misconceptions in the world, even among the professional community, about what singing with good breath support actually constitutes and what is required to do so. So I would say that breath support is huge. Making sure that you have good pitch acuity, in other words, if I play a pitch, you can sing it back to me with ease, is very important. Ear training, being able to understand intervals. If I told you to sing a major 7 interval, you should be able to know, even though it's a weird interval, you should be able to know how to sing it. You should have no problem singing fourths, fifths, major thirds, minor thirds. Those are all very, very important. And that's all ear training, development. Singing with a natural tone. Don't try to sound like your favorite singer. I know that it's a really tempting to want to sound like your favorite person, but the truth is that you are the only individual of you in the world. There is no other you. So since there is no other you, no one will ever sound like you. So it's just like anyone else. You'll never sound like them, no matter how much you try, or no matter how much you try to match your voice to them. You'll never sound like them. So don't try. It's not going to do any good. It's only going to hurt you in the long run. Those are just some really quick starting out ideas. Subglottal pressure. So that is a very, very complex subject, and you have to understand how the voice functions in the first place to understand what subglottal pressure is. Subglottal pressure is essentially buildup of air, of pressure underneath at kind of at the origin of the folds. Glottal attacks or glottal onsets in singing are when you have that kind of motion, almost like you're coughing. That sort of motion happening in the folds is a glottal motion. So subglottal pressure is you have buildup that leads to the onset of glottal attacks happening more often. Like I said, it's a little complex, and so it's not something. It's kind of outside the scope of like a primer, like overall video. Perhaps I shouldn't have even mentioned it if I wasn't willing to explain it all at once. But it is something that I would be more than willing to explain in the long term. Basically, it's what it does is it causes the folds to engage at the. There's a certain degree of timing that you need to have between when the folds engage and when the air comes through the voice, and subglottal pressure offsets that. And we could talk about that another time. Let's see. Okay. More about James. Yeah. Just as a side note, I would argue that James's vocal issues started far before that show in 2015. I think James started showing vocal issues back in 1995. I remember listening to the Change of Seasons EP and hearing, especially toward the end of the recording, that he was having some major intonation issues and some serious technique problems by then. So I would say that after the Awake tour was when James really started experiencing his first decline. Anyway, so that just answers these questions. I plan on making more videos. If you guys want to respond to this and give me some things to talk about, I would love to do that and maybe make this a regular thing. Release a video every few days, kind of discussing a subject. I don't know much of anything about making videos, so if I'm doing like critical things wrong, like things that the YouTuber shouldn't do, just tell me, and I'll try to clean those up. But I really don't know what I'm doing, so I just really, more than anything, I love this. This is what I do for a living. The voice. Yeah, I teach 4 instruments, but voice is my bread and butter. I love it, and I love teaching it. So this is a great opportunity for me to feel like I can kind of carve out a niche on YouTube of sort of being someone that can give like reliable advice backed by science, that isn't trying to just appeal to someone's, desire to sound like Taylor Swift or James LaBrie or whoever it is. Like, I can give advice that's practical and true, and I can give an objective analysis of music. I have my favorite singers, but I would say that none of my favorite singers have excellent technique, except in the classical realm they do. But all of my favorite singers outside of classical have bad technique. So I'm a singer, but I have flaws in my technique. I have imperfections as well, and it's an ongoing process. There have only been a very few singers throughout history who've had pretty much perfect technique. Pavarotti is one of them, and I would say that he starts and ends the short list over the past, 20 years. I haven't really found anyone else with flawless technique other than him. So, we all have things to work on. What I believe defines a responsible, healthy singer is someone who's actively trying to understand where these things can be better and trying to improve the things that make them a more sustainable singer, and that listen to advice that they may not want to hear, because a lot of times the voices, people singing and using their voice is such a personal thing that they don't want to hear something that tells them that they have some kind of limitation. But that's the natural part of the voice. I'm a baritone. There's no way I'll ever be able to sing the way that James LaBrie does, because it's not my voice range. My voice isn't built that way. But then again, I could sing a low E flat on the bass clef and lower with relative ease. James LaBrie could never sing those notes if his life depended on it. So all our voices are different, and I believe that understanding your own characteristics and trying to hone in on those and perfect those is the way to go. If you think about it, most notes that you sing in the middle of your range. Very rarely, or less rarely, do you go way up or way down. So if you master singing in the middle of your range first, that helps you move up and down with more efficiency. And that's another subject we can talk about in the future too. I hope that this helps. Hope this gives you guys some insight. So I'm going to stop the video now, and feel free to subscribe or like or whatever you guys do with YouTube videos, and leave me some questions in the comments, and I'll try to get to them soon. Thanks, guys.